Welcome to the May edition of The Road To. We're here with some of our usuals, and I have a special guest from our state senate. But we're going to start, I'm Patty Morsey, your hostess, and we're going to start with introductions from our usual panelist, Mike Lane. Would you like to give us a little Mike Lane intro?
Patty, it's good to be back in the chair. It seems like it was a long time since we've been together, but I'm happy to be back. Our regular viewers will remember me as the Inside the Beltway person on this show. There was a time when I served on the Arlington County Board. There was a time when I was party chairman in Arlington and the 8th District. I now live in Alexandria, and I spend most of my time trying to get like-minded Republicans elected to office.
All right, thanks, Mike. And we have our usual pundit from the somewhat left, not totally left, Phyllis Randall, my friend from Loudoun County.
Hi, Patty. Thanks for having me back. It's been, since November since we were here last before the election when I correctly predicted that we would sweep all 3 statewide offices.
Yes. You won that.
I won that.
Yes.
I did win that, yeah.
You even won the spread on the AG's race.
I did. Yeah. I did. When I say a wonk, I mean it. I mean it. I'm a political activist and advocate in Loudoun County. The issue I've been working on most recently is the issue of the school-to-prison pipeline. I've been going out around the state actually teaching and educating people about what the school-to-prison pipeline is and how to avoid it. I am the immediate past chair of Virginia's Fair Housing Board, and I'm just very happy to be back. Thanks for having me.
Okay, great. We also have a retired Air Force colonel friend of mine and also a former candidate for U.S. Congress, Jeff Barnett. Could you give us a little background on Jeff Barnett?
Sure, Patty. Again, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to this conversation today. Lots going on. Some people may remember me. I ran against Frank Wolf for the U.S. Congress in 2010. After that election, Frank called me and said that he and I, in his opinion, ran the most honest, positive race in the country, and I'm very proud of that. I've also, lately, I've been doing a lot of writing. I have a blog, Fiscal Conservative, Social Liberal. It's easy to find. Just blog Barnett and put those words in, and you'll find it. Still very active in politics, and again, still doing a lot of writing.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. And we also have our special guest, State Senator Barbara Favola from Arlington, and we'll let you speak for yourself, Barbara.
Thank you, Patty. I'm delighted to be here, especially with these other panelists. It should be a lot of fun. I do represent portions of Northern Virginia. I have portions of Arlington, portions of Fairfax, and portions of Loudoun in my Senate district. So it gives me the perspective.
You're my state senator.
I'm your state senator. It gives me a nice
Just
broad
barely.
Perspective, a little blue, a little purple, a little red.
So you're one of her portions, I think.
I'm on her western
As
portion.
an interesting aside, I served on the Arlington County Board for 14 years, but Mike Lane was one of the few Republicans that was elected to the board in a special election, and he and I served with together.
We sat next to each other on the dais.
That's correct. Yeah, so we know each other.
Okay, good. That'll be fun. All right, so we're going to start off issue-wise today with minimum wage, because that cuts across federal, state, and local debates. I just heard that Seattle actually raised the minimum wage there to $15 an hour. So why don't we start with you, Phyllis?
Was it $15 an hour? I didn't know it was that high. I thought it was 10 point. Was it $15 an hour?
Yeah,
Wow.
so anyway, this is an issue that lots of different positions across the country on whether we need a minimum wage and how much it should be.
During the State of the Union, President Obama actually spoke on this issue and vowed that we were going to raise the federal minimum wage. And this past week, that vote fell short by 6 votes. It got stopped in the Senate by 6 votes, and it was really, really unfortunate, because if you actually look and adjust the minimum wage for inflation, what you'll find is the minimum wage pay now is equal to what it was in the 1970s. And so not only is it not adequate for living today, it would not have even been adequate for living in the 1970s. It is really a poverty wage. It is impossible to raise a family and live on what we pay minimum wage employees, and it is a travesty. And as President Obama says, you know, the real shame is when you have someone who works a full-time job and still can't afford to pay their bills and feed their family. This past week, there was a Republican running, the name slips me right now, in South Dakota, who compared people who took food stamps to not feeding the animals. You don't get food stamps because animals get if you feed the animals, they rely on and become dependent on the food, and they compare people who were on food stamps to animals in the zoo. And it was really just a shameful statement. And this kind of disdain and not willing to recognize that there are people who are struggling and trying and working full-time jobs and more, but cannot make it on their salary that they receive. It really is a nationwide issue that we must address.
Yeah.
When we
are
have an
creating
artificially low minimum wage, what happens is the rest of us, the rest of the taxpayers, end up having to subsidize.
Absolutely.
And that's especially true here in Northern Virginia. A family of 4, so let's say you have 2 wage earners and 2 kids, and the 2 kids are going to school. If the 2 wage owners combined are $43,500 or less, then their kids get subsidized meals.
Right.
Right.
Well, that $43,500, that comes out to about $11
Right.
an hour
Exactly.
minimum wage.
Exactly.
What the president's talking about is $1 less than that.
$1 less than that, yes.
10.
Yeah.
So as far as Northern Virginia is concerned, we can talk about a national issue, sure, but as far as we're concerned around here, this should be an absolutely no-brainer
It really
for
should.
us,
It really should.
because when you don't pay a minimum wage, you end up subsidizing.
Paying in other ways anyway.
You subsidize the owners of Walmart.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, I mean, I don't know how you feel personally, but obviously there's a lot of Republicans that are just doctrinally opposed to having any kind of minimum wage law.
I'm going to disappoint you, Patty, and say that I'm one of those.
Okay.
Look, the best thing we can do for people to earn a good living is to have them skills and to have a vibrant economy where labor as a commodity becomes rare, scarce, and employers are bidding for it. That is the way to raise up the people at the lower end of the economic scale. The way not to do it is to have government have an edict where you're going to redistribute the income from the job creators to the people they're paying. Look, if a job is worth $10.10 an hour, if that's what an employer has to pay to get somebody who can do the job, who's skilled, that's what they're going to pay. But I don't see any benefit at all to the government just dictating, I guess about 1010 is good. Well, 1010 is based on what was it 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Well, who cares? It was wrong 30 years ago and it's wrong now. Skills and a vibrant economy are the way to make sure that everyone who's working a full-time job is not collecting these
and that's
benefits.
the key, right? Go ahead, Barbara.
I'm sorry, but to achieve what you just laid out, Mike, families need to be making enough money to provide for the essentials and to actually perhaps spend money so they can go on and get the job training.
Exactly.
I mean, to have people who are earning right now $8 an hour, sometimes $7.50, that simply is not enough. In fact, it removes the incentive to work. They're working so hard and they still can't make their payments. They start making judgments about whether, I should really continue to do
Exactly.
this. All the studies have shown that raising the minimum wage actually increases the amount of dollars available to the economy. So the economy would get a huge boost. And just as an aside, half of the folks on minimum wage are not your single teenagers.
Exactly.
They're working mothers.
I think the average age
Head
is
of
34
household
years old.
mothers.
That's right. That's right.
It's not half. They're actually, Barbara, from the studies I read, which are obviously different from the studies you read, a very low number of people who are working the minimum wage and supporting a family of 4 on that. It just doesn't happen.
The average
that it
age of
doesn't happen.
minimum the
It's-
average age of minimum wage workers is 34, and the number the number of people who are on minimum wage about that age range is 43%. So it's not half,
Right.
but it's close to half,
And-
and so it's not a very low number, Mike. Once again, we have to talk facts. We have to talk
I
numbers.
am
Talk
talking
facts.
facts,
Okay.
fellas. You know, and how long do people work for the minimum wage? You know what? If you get a job and you show up and you make yourself of value to the company, 70% of minimum wage earners get a raise within 9 months, and 90% get a raise within a year.
And is the wage still a living wage? What's the wage? 10 cents? What is the
no,
what is
it's
what's
typically not 10 cents.
What-
That
what
would
is it
be an
typically?
insult.
This is really
You know-
this is really the broader conversation about the what should be the rise of the middle class, but in our society, it's the decline of the middle
Look, we
class.
need economic expansion. We need good paying jobs.
Right.
We need opportunities for people to go. We need employers who will pay a market wage to people because they can't get them by paying less than that market wage. And as long as we have an economy that is just bumping along doing absolutely nothing, then we're going to have a surplus
Right.
of labor
You
and
put your
a
finger on
shortage
it,
of jobs.
and the economy writ large, and the demand that comes from that would drive that. But again, but if you're feeding, if all the money is being, basically put into the top 0.1% of the wage earners.
Well, I don't think
now-
all the money's being put there. And
Well, if you
and-
look at the statistics, it's horrible. But that's like another whole show.
Right.
We need to do that
Patty,
show.
no, but you're talking about you're talking about income disparity, and the president wants to talk about income equality and all that stuff. Well, the problem is not that
president's
the rich
talking
are
about
getting richer.
paying
The
a living
problem
wage
is that
is
the
what the
poor are
president's
not
talking
getting
about.
ahead because there's no demand for their labor, because they have no skills, and because there are no
And
jobs.
part of the reason they
That's
have no
the
skills
problem.
is because they can't, as they have no further education. And you know
can't
why they
pursue
can't pursue
goals,
educational
they can't
goals or
pursue
anything
the
else
kind of
because
goals
of-
that we have pursued
Exactly.
to
And
give
then it
ourselves
gets to
skills.
tax policy, and
One-
then it gets
It creates
to,
a
it
permanent
does-
People don't
underclass.
want to be poor. They don't want to live
One
on a
last
minimum
thing,
wage.
the gold
Thank you.
standard, not that I consider it the gold standard, but everybody else calls the Congressional Budget Office the gold standard. CBO says that we will lose 500,000 jobs if we raise the minimum wage. And by the way, using their figures, 57% of those people who lose their jobs will be women.
But the CBO also said that it would improve
That
the
has
economy.
not been our experience.
I'm just telling you what CBO
They
says.
did say
That's
that.
the gold
I
standard, I'm told,
I did
you know?
read that report, but the other side of that same report was it will improve the economy. So what
Yeah.
Senator Bovola just
When
said.
I look at it,
you're going
it's
to say the
from a-
CBO report, you got to do the whole thing.
I look at it.
No, I don't.
Let me just add one other-
Okay. All right. One more thing, then we got to move to other issues.
I think that the minimum wage is a much bigger issue than just for the people that are earning the minimum wage. Because when a company like Walmart, where a third of its U.S. force is being paid minimum wage, a third of it, two things happen. Number one, massive amounts of money flow to the owners of Walmart.
Right.
And that's why 4 of the top 10 richest people in America are heirs to the Walmart fortune.
Yeah.
$36 billion apiece. And number two, now you end up with a bunch of working poor that the rest of us, the middle class, ends up having to subsidize through all, whether, as I said before, school lunches, or whether it be education or
Healthcare.
healthcare or whatever.
Right.
So in essence, we are subsidizing the oligarchs
Right.
at Walmart. And why that is in our interest as a nation.
I think we need to
I'm
do a
glad-
whole show on that.
I'm
this
glad
issue.
Jeff brought up
I think
Walmart. I'm
that's-
going to put one more thing in here.
Okay.
I'm very glad you brought up Walmart
plug
because
Walmart?
in the Dakotas, whereas we all know the economy is absolutely booming as a result of the energy renaissance, they're building things. They're getting started. It's economic activity. Walmart is moving in. They're building. A starting associate at Walmart in the Dakotas gets $17.50 an hour because that's the market
Demand.
wage they have to pay to find the labor.
Interesting.
That's the kind of economy we should have.
But that's not the situation for Walmart workers right here in
All right,
Fairfax.
guys, we're gonna
if we had
switch.
a vibrant economy, it would
We're
be.
gonna
We
switch.
do have a vibrant economy.
Vibrant economy.
Okay,
Are you kidding?
we're going to switch to state topics, transitioning from federal to how the Affordable Care Act is going to be implemented in Virginia. And I'm going to start with Barbara because as a state senator, she's living through the debate over Medicaid expansion and knows all the details about what's reality in Virginia with respect to the healthcare issue.
Okay. Well, the Affordable Care Act, Virginia actually did pass last year a law that would require the state to set up the exchanges following the federal guidelines. So we've got these exchanges up. We expect they're going to help small businesses. They're going to help individuals who are sole proprietors. And they're going to help folks who, are between like that 100% and 400% of poverty. So we've got that structure in place. What the debate is now is on Medicaid expansion. Virginia has one of the skimpiest Medicaid programs in the state. If you're aging or disabled, you can only earn 80% of the poverty level to qualify for Medicaid. Now, moms and babies can get up to 100%, but single adults are not covered on Medicaid now. So what the federal government said in an effort to try to pick up the uninsured, they said, we're going to make it easy for you states. We're going to pick up the folks that are above your Medicaid program up to 138% of poverty, and we'll pay you 100% of that cost through 2016. And as we looked at the numbers, we said, gee, that's a good deal because we're paying substantially for this care now, and you and I, those who have insurance, are suffering higher premiums because folks who are ill do go to the emergency room. They don't have enough money to go to a doctor, but they'll go to an emergency room. And the cost of that care is passed on to those of us who have insurance, and the hospitals are still stuck with the debt, with some of that debt. So we have a coalition in the state that is urging the House Republicans to stop getting wrapped around this ideological theme about Obamacare and to start focusing on what Virginians need. We have a business coalition, we have hospitals, every major business group in the state has supported Medicaid expansion. It is an extraordinarily good deal. So after the federal government pays the 100% through 2016, their commitment will go no less than 90%. And oftentimes the Republicans say, well, the federal government may renege. Medicaid has been around for 50 years. Not once has the federal government reduced its commitment to Medicaid.
Okay.
And by the way, we're accepting federal money all the time. $20 billion are flowing through the state from the federal government for transportation, human services, public safety, a range of things.
Okay.
So that argument doesn't hold. And then I could go into nuances about what the governor suggested and what the Senate suggested.
But, let me go to Mike because, you're not a state senator right now, but you probably
probably never will be.
You probably have a pulse
Another state in Arlington.
what is the real hang up with respect to the Republicans, particularly in the House of Delegates, accepting an expansion of Medicaid funding from the federal government?
All right, it's threefold. Number one, they would respectfully disagree with Senator Favola about whether or not the federal money is still going to be there forever and ever and ever. There is a real expectation that that this whole thing is going to be redone come 2017. Now, if the election doesn't go the way we would hope it would, then clearly that gets taken off the table. But if the election goes the way we hope it does in 2016, that money won't be there. The second thing, I think, and so where does Virginia come up with the money at that point to pay it? Because once you've given this entitlement benefit to people, as we all know, it's next to impossible to take it away. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, under Governor McAuliffe's proposal, we would save $225 million in our current biennium budget. And he would dedicate $100 million of that to a trust fund to pay the state's share of the 10% over time. The other point that both the moderate Republican, the bipartisan coalition, with which I was a part of in the Senate, and Governor McAuliffe, we both came out with a provision that essentially says, Recipients of Medicaid expansion will be informed that this program will stay as currently is as long as the federal government continues its commitment. And we received a letter, the governor received a letter from the Secretary of Health and Human Services saying the state would not be penalized if we chose to withdraw from Medicaid. So we have addressed these arguments.
What if?
It's just you have to be you have to be
Right, but-
rational about it.
Barbara, as you know, any Congress can undo what the previous Congress did, and any secretary can undo what the previous secretary did, and so, you know.
Well, the composition of the General Assembly is not changing anytime
I know,
soon
but
because of the redistricting.
This letter was written by the same secretary who told me I could keep my health care and my doctor, and so, you know, easy shot, I know.
Let's go to Phyllis. What's your take on this?
You know, my take is there's a difference between politics and policy. Senator Favola just very well laid out the policy, and on the face of the policy, there's no reason not to expand Medicaid in Virginia. This is not an issue of policy. This is an issue of politics. This is an issue of the House.
It's money, Phyllis. Where's the
This
money
is an
going to come
issue.
from?
This is
The federal government, and by the way,
The federal government is running trillion-dollar deficits.
Virginians
We're paying,
are
but it's
giving the
coming
federal
out of
government
it anyway.
$5
We're still
million
going to
a
pay
day.
it.
$5 million
Whether
a
or not
day,
it comes to us,
we can
we're still
expand
paying it.
in
I mean,
27
that's
states.
actually fact. Look, you have House members of the General Assembly doing things like growing beards that they're not going to cut until. I'm not kidding.
I know.
Okay, whatever.
Including my House delegate Tad Greason. It is just, it's, you know, you have these kind of gimmicky things going on, and really,
I'm shocked that there's gimmicky
what
things in
it is,
politics.
it's an issue, and Senator Vogel just said it, it's an issue of redistricting. These people live in safe districts, and they believe that if they vote for what is right, then they're going to be primaried from the right and lose their seats. This is not about doing what's right for Virginia. This is this is what the House Republicans believe is about doing what's right for keeping their seats. This is not good politics. This is not good policy. This is not good for Virginia in any way.
Phyllis, it's about doing what, from their perspective, what's right, which is good fiscal management of the state.
You've got to be kidding.
There
I
is
can
not
name
going to be
Randy
the money.
Minshew. I can name Tad Greason, who live in districts that have not even. I live in the district. Haven't been polled to ask what they want, because when they had a town hall meeting, the people that came to the town hall meeting said loudly and clearly, "We
Okay.
want you to expand
It's-
Medicaid."
Come on,
They're not actually doing what the
Republicans-
constituents
We've all
want.
stacked
They're
town hall
trying to-
meetings.
But the
It was their town hall meetings. It was their town hall meetings. They called them.
The Republican
They called
the
them.
Republican Party has become beholden to the Tea Party. And the
Oh,
way
please.
and the way these districts are drawn, the only competition a lawmaker faces is intra-party. So if
Yeah.
they're Republican, they have to move far to the right, or they'll be primaried and would lose. And we had a classic example of Delegate Joe May, very
Yeah.
responsible Republican delegate,
Loved.
voted for the transportation plan, was easy
Was
to
chair of
work
the
with.
Constitution Committee. Chair of
And
the
he-
committee.
Look.
Right.
Lost to
he
David
lost,
Brock.
All right, look.
He lost.
I know Joe May.
a
Joe May
primary.
was a friend of mine. I think that it's tragic that Joe May is not in the General Assembly anymore. Anybody's entitled to be challenged at any time. Joe May lost that primary because Joe May lost his organization. He'd been in for 20 plus years, and when it came time to a primary, he couldn't get 2,000 people out to come vote for him. For a 20-year incumbent, that spoke more to his politics than his policies, I think.
I think
No.
it sent a message. I think the Republican lawmakers today are looking at that election
Yes.
and saying,
my
"I better
God.
fear." And yet there's still, and yet I will say there's a coalition of moderate Republicans in the House. Maybe they're
Senate.
not so moderate, who will actually
I
vote
mean,
for.
you have to ask why is
They'll vote
who's
for
the one
Medicaid
Republican
expansion.
who's actually talked about and supported Medicaid expansion? Tom Rust. Why?
It's his district.
It's his district.
Right.
It's his district. This is an issue of politics. This is not an issue of sound
And-
mind.
and the
think that
speaker's got
Democrats,
that.
though,
Let's
Let
should-
loosen
Jeff
up
chime
his-
in here.
I think Democrats should look at this too. A couple of points. First, as I understand it, Medicaid today is 21% of the general fund.
It is.
That is a huge nut
It
that
is.
people are already paying.
Yeah.
And I
expanding.
think that people look at that and go, that's a lot of money, and now you want me to pay more. So talk me through that. And we haven't heard that debate. What we've heard are the politics of it, as you just said, politics versus policy. The other thing that I think Democrats should be worried about is Christopher Newport University had a poll, both I think in February and in March, I think it was. And the one in February, 53%, 53% supported Medicaid expansion. A month later, 56% were against it.
I read the poll.
what happened there was nothing except in the second poll, the question inserted Democrat and Republican into it. And that caused a shift. The Democratic brand is very weak right now in Virginia. I haven't talked to Governor McAuliffe about this at all, but my guess is he's taking on this fight because he kind of has to because of the calendar. You know, this is an issue that has to be addressed. But I would think that he would have liked to have had some wins in some other areas before he took this on.
I think he's taken on this fight because it was a fight that was discussed. It was the budget issue, but it was also a fight that was discussed during the election. And he was very clear during the election that he was going to support Medicaid expansion and why, and he was elected governor. And so it wasn't like he ran away from this issue and people did not know where he stood. They did, and he won anyway. Let me also just say this really quickly. Actually, Governor McAuliffe, between the end of the General Assembly session and the specialist session, one thing Governor McAuliffe did was the advice you're now giving him, which is to go around to businesses and organizations and talk about this, and no less than the Chamber of Commerce is supporting this. And let's face it, the Chamber of Commerce is not a liberal-leaning organization.
We've got
normally.
a few seconds left. We got like a half a minute,
Half
and
a
I'd like
minute.
Barbara to kind of wrap it
Wrap
up
it
in
up.
terms of this issue.
Well, Jeff, you gave it very interesting perspective. I do want to add, though, that there are two proposals in play on Medicaid expansion, the governor's and this bipartisan proposal called Marketplace Virginia. And that proposal would require individuals to pay 5% of the premium out of their own pocket. It has the language in there about, if the federal government changes its policy, you'll be dropped. It requires that everybody be working. 70% of the folks who are eligible are working. They're your working poor. They're the ones on the minimum wage.
Okay. We've got to go to break, but we'll.
Fine.
I'm sorry to interrupt
No,
you.
no problem. I understand.
Very great to listen to you. All right, we'll be back in a few minutes for the second half of The Road 2.
Events of September 11th, there have been hundreds of violent attacks against innocent Americans.
Remember what that flag you're waving stands for. Remember, please stop the hate.
We're stronger when we are united.
Remember
what that flag you're waving stands for. One nation,
Under God.
Indivisible.
with liberty.
And justice.
For all.
in America, there's either room for everyone or it's not America.
Don't pick the wrong fight.
Let's keep America land of the free.
Stop the hate.
You'd never know it on the battlefield, but nearly half of today's military are National Guard and reservists. However, they can't answer our nation's call without their employer's support. If you're an employer, visit esgr.org and find out how to do your part. After all, their response depends on yours.
This is Mommy's bed. Me and Jenny were jumping on it. Mommy's gun fell on the floor. I was a cowboy. Bang, 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 bang. I said, Jenny, wake up, it's just pretend. But she wouldn't wake up.
I'm sick of this. I'm sick of dealing with you. I'm sick of
I work 6 days a week.
Who
do you think you
Stand up
are?
straight.
Don't you ever talk back to me again! You just shut up!
What are you crying about?
What a child learns about violence, a child learns for life. Teach carefully. We can show you how. Act Against Violence. Call 877-ACT-WISE for a free brochure.
Sweetheart, smoke outside now. You promise.
Okay, hon.
Sweetheart, smoke outside now. You promise.
What kind of man are you?
I'm a father.
Look here, my father was a father, and he smoked his brains out in the house.
Watch as he blows those smoke rings on my little red face.
You probably have asthma.
Asthma? Schlasma. I'm telling you, nothing's gonna happen to your kids. I swear.
Don't swear when you're lying. You know very well that thousands of kids get bronchitis, ear infections, and even pneumonia from their parents' cigarette smoke. And didn't you promise your little angels you'd smoke outside?
Hey, Daddy. Hi, Dad.
Those little devils are just so sweet.
Do the right thing.
Please, smoke outside.
Until you can stop, go out for your kids.
Take the pledge. Call 1-800-513-1157.
As time flows on, there are places we return to again and again. Precious places. Timeless places. Places that with your help can endure forever. I'm Paul Newman. Help the Nature Conservancy save the last great places around the world.
Start yelling at us. Welcome back to the second half of the Road 2. We've got a very intelligent panel going on here today. We're going to let Senator Favola finish her description of the politics and policy around Medicaid expansion, healthcare, and then we're going to transition to a larger conversation about mental health care. But go ahead, Barbara.
Thank you, Patty. Well, let me just conclude that with $2 billion coming in annually, if Virginia did participate in Medicaid expansion, we would create 30,000 jobs. And I just find it unconscionable that lawmakers who are in districts where they have high unemployment and a high percentage of their constituents eligible for Medicaid expansion are still voting no. So I have to conclude by thinking this is really more of a national marketing issue. You know, the Republicans in Congress are using Obamacare in the 2014 elections, and I think that there's some reluctance on the part of states led by Republicans to give any credibility to Obamacare because they want to turn it into an election issue. And that's just not how we should be running a state, but I think that's the reality of it. I think this backdrop of the federal patina regarding Obamacare has been problematic. Now, let me just say, 27 states have agreed to expand, and 5 of them are Republican governors and general assemblies. Another 5 have been mixed.
Let me tell you what else will strengthen your hand on this, and that is, as you know, since you were integrally part of it, there were certain terms and conditions expected in terms of the management of the program, which would reduce the costs. Now, I know that Secretary Hazel has certified that all these changes have been made and is projecting that the savings will be there. If you go 1 year and actually demonstrate that those savings actually happen, or 2 years and demonstrate the savings are happen, I think you're going to be on much stronger ground.
Mike, Virginia is the best managed Medicaid program in the country.
It's still 21% and rising, as Jeff told us.
We use a managed care model, and that's what we would use under both of the proposals in play on Medicaid expansion. JLARC did a study on the fraud and abuse.
Say JLARC for the average person out there,
It's a Joint Legislative Review Commission, Audit Commission. But they came up with a 0.3% in terms of provider and recipient fraud. So this is just a bogus argument on I can tell you the Defense Department has an error rate that is a heck of a lot higher than 0.3%.
That's for sure.
Let's
that ought to be stopped.
We need to talk about.
Why would we tolerate that?
Did you want me to address anything else?
Well, let's talk about mental health, because I know that mental health is part of the criteria for what a decent health care plan looks like under Obamacare, right? Mm-hmm. So, plenty of people have had experience with massive weakness, lack of capacity within the mental health care system. In Virginia, look at Virginia Tech shooting, our good friend Creed Deeds with his son's mental health issues and ended up killing himself. That horrible tragedy could have been avoided, legitimately could have been avoided if we had better capacity, more care for people with mental health, and it's time to get rid of that stigma. But Phyllis is a mental health professional, so let's start with you, Phyllis, and then anyone else that'd like to chime in. And
no, I am. When I'm not advocating in politics, I'm by profession a mental health therapist. We can do 2 or 3 shows on this issue. I'm not even sure where to start. On my way here, I called just to check these numbers to make sure I have my numbers correct. 1 in 5 adults in their lifetime will suffer from a diagnosable and treatable mental health condition. And the belief that mental health does not touch virtually every family in the country is actually a fallacy. And the stigma behind mental health issues is why we get to a place where people, when we have situations like the Virginia Tech shooting and things like that. What happened after Virginia Tech was that the General Assembly poured $32 million into mental health funds, both for local CSBs, for long-term treatment units.
CSBs?
So community services boards.
Okay.
And local treatment units. And after time, that money eroded away because we tend to respond to mental health issues kind of reactively and not proactively. And so as we got down the road, what you saw was many of the community services boards did not have money and do not have money to treat things preventively. And the only funds that were available and that are available are for emergency services. And by the time somebody walks into an emergency service unit, either in a hospital or a mental facility, they're probably pretty bad off.
Yeah.
And
it's a crisis.
It's by
They
the
either hurt themselves
or they're going to hurt
else,
somebody,
right?
or they're being brought in by they're being detained because they're saying they're going to hurt somebody, or
It's imminent.
It's imminent. You can't see mental health, and so we don't tend to treat mental health. So of course we had this very tragic incident that happened with Cree Deeds' son, Gus Deeds, and what it was that there was no mental health facility that had an open bed. Which, if you're a mental health therapist, that is not something new or surprising. We find our case managers find this all the time, and we send people home daily. We send people home daily who should not be going home, who do not have the capacity, and we send them home with a contract that they sign to say, "I won't hurt myself." Really,
Is that really?
really, it's really we need services, and so Senator Deeds, who's a heroic and amazing man, came back in and said he was going to fight for mental health funds, and he did. And there was a lot of very, wonderful lip service when he came back and things, but
It gets down to.
what happened? It got down to nuts and bolts. And one of the
let's let Barbara.
You finished. We did take. Fortunately, I was a co-patron of Senator Deeds' bill and did contribute some legislative proposals. It's an omnibus bill. I think we put in some structural reforms on the crises intervention part of it.
Okay. But that actually it's back to responding, not prevention. But it did. I read all the bills.
Right. But the crises intervention piece, we made progress. And what we did is we're requiring the state to keep an online registry of beds available statewide, psychiatric beds. And we're also now requiring, if a community services board cannot locate a local psychiatric bed, the nearby state facility must take this individual if the medical profession determines they still need care. What's going on now are the judges will not issue a temporary detention order unless there's a bed. So folks are going home who are very fragile and still very, very much in need of professional care. We're also going to put additional money in for these crises intervention centers, so we can relieve some of the pressure on our emergency rooms in the hospitals. And these crises intervention centers would be staffed 24/7, and so sheriffs could drop off the individuals and they can be evaluated right away. So we've made some progress. The governor has set up a task force on mental health reform. The General Assembly has a committee going on mental health reform. But while I'm speaking of this, I think Phyllis raised an excellent point. You're so much better off if you can get to the mental health issue sooner rather than later.
Yeah. It's the
Again,
key.
there was another
It's the key.
study done by the Department of Health and Human Services, DMAS, actually it was at the state level, and they determined that if we had had preventive care, 50% of the voluntary institutionalizations would have been not needed.
If you look at it if you look at mental health like any other health issue, so let's compare this to cancer. If you do preventative work up front, it's like getting the cancer screening and catching it before it metastasizes. What we actually do now is not only don't catch it, we know it's going to metastasize. We watch it metastasize, and then we go in for the emergency surgery that actually,
If there's room.
that costs a lot more and is a lot more harmful to everybody involved.
And getting back to Medicaid expansion would, under Medicaid expansion, Virginia would gain $200 million a year for individuals who need mental health services at the time their symptom shows itself. So we'd be able to use that money for community-based services, for medication, for therapists, right away when we can see depression and some other things that we know are signs. But that's under Medicaid expansion. They're trying to do the right thing.
It's very expensive if you don't have
If you don't do that.
One other plug in. Families that have mental health disorders have a higher rate of domestic violence in their family.
Yes.
They obviously have a higher rate of suicide in their family. They normally and often live more socially and economically depressed. And so mental health issues are not just mental health issues. They actually expand out to, they are societal issues, and they expand out to every part of society. It is really, again, you don't see it. If you see somebody with a broken leg, you know they're broken. But because you can't see these issues and you can't see the 1 in 5, it is not addressed. And we have to put the money in and keep the money in.
Does the gentleman like to?
Yeah, I have one little point. And I think Michael has some.
One little point as well.
Much more interesting things. But when you said you can't, it's something that's difficult to observe.
Mm-hmm.
That makes it difficult to measure. And a lot of what we talked about is the money going for input, is for what we're going to do. But what I've not seen, and I think that all of us that the support statewide would be much better if we could see, okay, we're going to spend X amount of money and we expect to see A, B, and C type of results, and we can measure against that. And instances of domestic violence would be a tremendous one.
Actually, with all due respect, it's not hard to measure. When you walk
then
into
it shouldn't be very hard to publicize.
But it's
as long as you're tracking.
No.
But there's still a stigma about that.
No, there's no stigma about, I think, at the macro level, the metadata level of just saying, this is what we're spending, and look at the results. We spent this money in the wake of the Creed Eads disaster. We spent this money, and look how we're turning the corner. But what we end up doing is spending the money, and then there's no feedback as to how we're doing.
And there's a program that I am aware of, and it is a program that actually serves people who have their mental health condition is substance abuse issues, and this program actually has a 74% success rate. The local government was actually they ended up not after a big protracted fight, was actually going to cut the funding because they thought, well, they're just substance abusers, they're just drug addicts anyway. So not only was it a program that was assessed and measurable and proven, but even after that, and it was shown how much money it saved the local government, they still were going to cut it.
I'm working on a model program which actually would bring mental health services to the public schools, because our teachers can identify kids, but they need a mental health therapist, not a guidance counselor, and the kids need to be evaluated right away.
Yeah.
And
it's
a wonderful
teens,
model.
right?
We're doing it in Alexandria. I did put in a budget amendment this year. It was one of the few I didn't get funded, but we'll get it next year.
Absolutely. Call me so I can come up
and
there and
it'll
help
give us
lobby
a link to, thank you. It'll give us a link to so many other things, primary care, other services that a family may need, but we'll be focusing on that young child who really is suffering.
Yeah, it does start early.
Quickly, healthcare has evolved unequally and separately. There was a time, alluding to what Phyllis said, where a physical ailment is something you can observe. It's something somebody can talk about. They can describe, their symptoms, etc. 50, 100 years ago, mental health, not so much. You don't even know when you have a mental health issue. So we evolved much more quickly on physical health as a society or as a profession than we did on mental health. Some people may say I'm going back too far, but I think the last 50 years, particularly the last 30 years, We have become much more cognizant of mental health issues. It's starting to really snowball now, and actually it started snowballing about 10 years ago and getting bigger and bigger. I think some of the measurements that you were talking about do exist now, whereas they didn't exist 50 years ago. We do know how effective we can be in mental health.
But we still don't fund it. After we know all this, we still don't fund it.
So we're playing catch up. And whenever you're playing catch up, the reality is that's what you're doing, is playing catch up. But it's very, very important from my perspective. I thank Phyllis for the work she does as a practitioner, and Barbara, what you've just described about what you're doing in the Senate. I'm all in. And if you need any help with my state senator, Adam Eben, I'll help you out.
I think Adam will be a strong ally.
All right, well, we're going to transition for a few minutes to an issue that's been in the news, on the national news outlets, related to some comments that the owner of the Clippers made that are very racist. And we wanted to just talk about this just a little bit from a broader perspective. And I wanted to let Phyllis, because Phyllis brought it up, it's something she's been thinking about from a societal level. So,
I've been talking a lot about this issue, not this particular issue, but the issue of race in America. And what I am frustrated about is we continue to have these incidents that happen, race incidents that happen every other month or so, and we call them isolated incidents. And we respond to that incident at that moment, and we refuse to actually have the broader talk about race in America. And a certain segment says everything's racist, and a certain segment says nothing's ever racist, because now we have a black president, so by golly, we couldn't have any racists in America if the president's black. But a conversation, a honestly led, courageous conversation by real thought leaders in this country has not taken place. Race in America is a huge, huge problem. When we look at the disparity in sentencing laws between people of color and people not of color for the same crimes with the same record. When we look at education, race in America is a huge problem just across the board. And I am so frustrated and in many ways just heartbroken that, that we cannot seem to get past the either complete denying this issue or kind of race baiting on the issue, and have a conversation about race in America and admit there's a problem and what do we do with it. And so, Donald Sterling is an old idiot, and so we don't have to talk about him for a very long time. He's an old idiot. But the first time my son was called the N-word was at a local mall. He was 3 years old. He was called it by a 5-year-old. And there hasn't been 1 year that has went by and the lives of my children who live and were raised in Northern Virginia where a race incident didn't happen to them. Yeah. And when I say this, people are just shocked, and I think the understanding between the minorities, Americans who are minorities and white America, the bridge is huge. I mean, there are people who really don't think there's a problem anymore. Yeah. It's a huge divide, and at some point, somebody has to be courageous and say, this is an issue, let's talk about it.
Yeah. And let's ask why it's still happening with little kids.
Look, and let me tell you my response at that moment, because my son was 3. Yeah. I went over, I picked up my son, and I pointed to this other little child, and I said, whose child is this? Yeah. Whose child is this? Because 5-year-olds don't come out their mouths with that word automatically. Whose child is this? I mean, it doesn't go away.
Yeah. I will say, though, on a lighter note, but this is a very important topic, I think the generation behind us, my children, and I think their children at some point, will be much more egalitarian in their view of the world and individuals. I think, marriage equality, that whole issue of gay marriage has really moved, into a more positive state in the polls. And I think that's people are more and more willing to accept individuals for their character and who they are, and to really embrace our American dream of live and let live. And I think that's why there was such a swift and I think decisive action taken against the gentleman who I guess inadvertently, but really made very racist comments. That's not who we are as a people.
It was a swift and decisive action taken because the NBA is a business, and they were going to lose money if they didn't do something with this.
And they have so many African American players.
They would not have the NBA without.
Yeah, really.
And the day that what you say, when we get to that day, I will celebrate with you. But we are not at that day yet. My children.
Well, there are too many of us around, and older
my
folks.
children are teenagers. My child is a teenager, and when I say that these things happen yearly, more than once a year, and they come from his peers, and so it is a peer-to-peer issue. When a 5-year-old calls a 3-year-old the N-word, we have a long way to go, and it's not just about people who are 90 and about to die off. I mean, we have an issue that is ongoing, and it's such an uncomfortable issue, and we don't want to talk about it, and we don't want to see it, and we elected a black president, so let's push it down, and how bad can it be? We have Eric Cole, all these things. But when you get to the micro level, racism in this country is still a real and prevailing problem, and it proves itself out when you look at stats on almost all issues across a range in our country.
Okay. You make the point that occurs to me as you're talking, as I'm thinking about what you're saying. And I guess you make the point that there has been an enviable and wonderful climb in the tolerance between the races, however you want to characterize it, during our lifetimes. But what you're saying is it's plateaued, or the trend line is not going up at the same rate that it was before, and it seems to be stuck. And I wonder why that might be. And I think one contribution might be leadership. I'm not really sure if there is a leadership on race today. I think it's more diffuse, certainly, but I think we were all appalled when the NAACP, pulled their Lifetime Achievement Award.
The second one that they were going to give.
That's the point. It wasn't that they pulled the second one.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I mean, what was this guy doing getting one 6 years ago?
Many of these issues around race are issues that we have to, in the African American community, address in our own community. They're not actually issues that we have to address them first. And so I agree with that completely. But let's look at Virginia. In my county of Loudoun, 250 plus years old, we've never had a person of color, of any color, elected to a county-wide office. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, every senator that is of color is from a majority minority district. We do not have one senator, nor have we ever had one senator that came from anything but a majority minority district. It's not just a plateau, it's a hard wall that stops us. So there are issues that are prevailing throughout, and you're right, there was a tolerance that went for a long time, but some of these things also just went underground, and so some of the conversation is not polite to have in normal public, but the feelings and the thoughts are still there, and part of it is you just don't know what you don't know about another culture, and that's where courageous conversation comes in, and part of it is a very uncomfortable issue, and part of it is race baiting on one side and complete denial on the other side, and all of it is leading to an issue where you can shoot a Trayvon Martin down in Florida and get off.
Hey guys, let's. I think we should have a whole show on this.
We should.
Let's spend the last 5 minutes, though. Actually, we only have 4 minutes left right now. But let's talk about the Republican primary that just occurred after Frank Wolf decided that he wasn't going to run again after 32 years, was it? But Jeff, let's start with you, and then we'll go with Mike regarding the outcome of the primary for the 10th District nominee Republican.
What I found fascinating is that 13,000 people, Republicans, showed up for this firehouse primary. In 2008, in a Democratic primary, which all the polls were open, it was Judy Fader against Mike Turner. 8,800 people showed up in the 10th District for that. So 50% more turned up for this firehouse primary. I think that is significant. In addition, Barbara Comstock won 56% of the vote. So, and I went to 2 of the debates. and it was very conservative.
Who else stayed in till the end? Because I know there were a whole bunch at the beginning.
Well, the big ones.
6 stayed in,
there were
right?
6.
Six,
Right,
yeah.
6
Bob
stayed in.
Marshall
Yeah.
was the big
Rob
one.
Weisinger, Howie Lind,
Bob Marshall.
Bob Marshall.
and those Howie Lind and Bob Marshall were kind of the big
Tea
guys, but very thoughtful people. Don't argue with Bob Marshall. I mean,
Oh, yes,
he is
yes.
a smart fella. You got to bring your kit.
And your mental health therapist.
So Barbara Comstock won this handily. She was able to attract a broad spectrum of voters. She was able to generate her base. These people were excited. The 10th district is an R+2 district, meaning
yeah.
that a nominal Republican is going to beat a nominal Democrat by 2 points. In addition,
Cuccinelli won by, what, a half a point in the 10th?
well,
And Romney won by a half a point in the 10th.
Romney took the 10th, and Cuccinelli took the 10th.
But Obama carried
In 08.
10th in 08.
That was the old,
Yeah,
that was the
yeah,
old
yeah.
10th,
Right.
before redistricting.
Right.
We
Yes,
have
it
2
was.
minutes left, guys, so let's talk fast. Okay.
I think,
points.
the takeaway here is that Barbara was able to unite the party. When you have a 6-way primary, everybody knowing that it's the field against the leader, and come out with 55, I thought it was 55, but 56, whatever, close enough % of the vote. She's united the party, and the question that I think she needs to pose to the electorate is, who is the natural heir to Frank Wolf's legacy, to Frank Wolf's policies? And I think she's got a strong case to make that she is the one. Frank Wolf, even when Obama was winning that district by 1 point, Frank Wolf was still winning 60-40. So she frames herself as the natural successor to Frank Wolf, and it's up to her opponent to figure out, okay, how do I not make that happen?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Well, I think it's going to be a very challenging race for both Barbara Comstock and John Faust. John Faust, I think, is a well-seasoned politician, highly regarded for his work on the Board of Supervisors. He was the only supervisor from Drainsville who was elected consecutively. So he obviously has
Only
had...
Democratic.
Only Democratic,
Right.
yes. Fair enough, yeah. So he obviously has some independents and some Republicans voting for him. So I think he's really going to give Barbara a run for her money. This is not a foregone conclusion that.
Oh, no, I didn't want to leave that
the
impression.
red, that necessarily the red candidate is going to win.
All right, we're going to have to wrap up, guys. This has been a great conversation, so it's with sadness that we're going to say goodbye. But we will see you next month on the June edition of The Road To, and thank you to my guests and regulars.